In a luxuriously furnished room of the Duran family estate, a maid was presenting a custom-made dress to a young mistress. Mistress Melissa approached the dress with interest, examining the satin sleeves, patterns, and other elements of the design, the work of a certain legendary master, as the maid assured. The girl took the hem of the dress in her hands and let the fabric slip through her fingers, while the maid smiled smugly, expecting praise. The next moment, Melissa yanked the dress angrily so that it fell along with the vertical hanger. From such a jerk, most of the decorations fanned out onto the floor, and the princess turned to the maid with a question. Since she was illegitimate, then she could be given cheap work with patches and fakes. The woman, who had barely carried this garment into the room, stood in a cordon, not knowing how to respond. Continuing to press, Melissa asked how the maid dared try to deceive her, while the woman fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. She also suggested something else, an unsuccessful joke, frowning with displeasure and fury. The woman, anticipating a cruel punishment, did not give up hope for forgiveness, constantly apologizing. This story, perhaps, begins with Melissa's realization of her hard and sad life. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and tried to understand what she had done to deserve such treatment, what had made her become so cruel. She was the daughter of a duke who, while married, had a mistress in the form of her mother, a servant. The mother allowed herself to be used because the duke allowed her daughter to live until she died in an abandoned outbuilding, broken in soul and body. The next blow the girl suffered was when her maid, Audrey, who always took care of her, was kicked out of the estate. Melissa understood that no one needed her, looking sadly at the empty table, with a rumbling in her stomach. However, even in a black and white life, there is white. And for Melissa, this white was her sister Rosemary. One day, out of the blue, she brought Melissa some flowers she had picked in the garden, saying that they looked very beautiful together. It was already evening, but the girl was still sitting on the chair, wondering about Rosemary's next visit. Oddly enough, it came a minute later, when the sister, accompanied by guards, appeared in Melissa. The girl rushed excitedly towards Rosemary, but the guards blocked her path, grabbing her by the arms. They forcibly held the girl in place, advising her to calm down, while Melissa tried to call for help from her sister. And then she noticed the strange, serene, and contented expression on Rosemary's face, looking at her from the doorway, inhaling the scent of the rose. She handed the twisted Melissa a flower and asked if she remembered how they picked them together. Next, Rosemary threw the flower on the floor, asking about the meaning of the color yellow in the language of flowers. Without waiting, she answered her own question, causing her sister to go cold with horror. Melissa still didn't understand what was happening, but they brought her to the square, where a bunch of people had already gathered, and tied her to a pole, under which there was a whole pile of firewood. A guard standing nearby read out the verdict, in which Melissa Duran was found guilty of drug trafficking and sentenced to be burned. The girl began to wriggle on the ropes like an eel, only now realizing what would soon happen. And in response to her protest, someone from the podium shouted at her to be quiet. On the contrary, she looked at the platform where the prince of the royal court stood with her sister. The prince gave the order for the execution to begin, shouting again to Melissa that she was guilty beyond all doubt. Rosemary stopped him. Tears were coming from her eyes, and she understood that she would ask the prince for the impossible. The girl folded her hands in a pleading gesture and asked to be given the opportunity to talk to Melissa alone. The prince hesitated, but the final argument was Rosemary's desire to say goodbye to her sister. The guy consoled the girl and still allowed her to briefly approach the pole on which Melissa was hanging. After some time, Rosemary approached her sister, who still did not believe what was happening. She tried to convince her that it was all a mistake and that she had nothing to do with drugs. However, instead of words of support, an attempt to somehow influence the situation, Rosemary, smiling brazenly, said that she came closer to enjoy the sight of her unhappy sister. It was then that Melissa learned the whole truth when her sister continued that she and her mother always irritated her, but she could do nothing about it. Wiping away fake tears, she finished her speech by calling Melissa a great toy. As if in a dream, the tied girl asked what she was talking about and what kind of thing she was saying. Rosemary smirked and called the girl a real idiot, which is exactly what she considered her to be. Knowing that her sister could no longer do anything, she became bold and said that her mother had died because of her. After which, The evil girl got rid of Audrey's maid, slandering her relationship with her. She enjoyed every moment and admired her actions that destroyed Melissa. Having expressed what she wanted and reveling in her victory, Rosemary returned to the prince, while the girl tied to the pole screamed that it was all a lie. The prince's order was carried out, and as the fire began to flare up, Rosemary smiled. The fire flared up despite the light rain and began to devour the tree that had been given to it, moving towards the girl's feet. Finally realizing that all her love for her sister was a lie and that she would die, the girl became embittered, desperately thinking that she would be able to survive this day. In the smoke of the fire, with eyes full of rage, Melissa saw her sister smiling, embraced by the prince. The girl decided that she would never forgive her, and the strength of her rage and desire for revenge were reflected in the ring. She woke up wet with sticky sweat and horror paralyzing her consciousness. Melissa sat on the bed and tried to understand what kind of dream it was, but her eyes fell on her hands. Approaching the mirror, she could hardly recognize herself, because in front of her stood the child she had been several years ago. The girl reached out her hand and touched the mirror, trying to see if she was asleep. And again, something strange. She had a ring on her finger that she didn't remember at all. The girl looked with interest at the red stone set in a gold frame. The door to the room swung open, and a maid walked into the room with a food truck in her hands. She wished the girl good morning and noticed the bed was untidy, which was not usually the case. Without focusing on this, the woman went to the window, declaring the excellent weather outside. Even though Audrey was much younger, Melissa needed to clarify whether she really saw her, after which she immediately rushed to hug her favorite maid. Audrey was always there for Melissa when she was alone, hurt, or in any other situation. The woman's worried face, asking about the nightmares, looked closely at the child. Deciding not to mention some of the oddities, Melissa confirmed the maid's guess about the nightmare, and she hugged her and began to calm her down. Audrey immediately wiped away the girl's tears and asked her to show her a smile, since today was an important birthday. Melissa didn't forget. She had lived through that moment a long time ago, when she was 7 years old in that terrible house. After some time, the maid was styling the girl's hair while she thought she was about to be executed. And when the fire flared up, she returned to her 7th birthday, until, not understanding how, then, having finished the preparations, Audrey congratulated the girl, and her ring glowed. Someone told her that they sincerely hoped for a good birthday, and when Audrey asked what she meant, she replied that she had said nothing. Audrey returned to the food truck and cheerfully asked if the lady would like some breakfast. The ring glowed as the girl again heard the voice inside her, which suggested that she was tired and needed herbal tea, to which Melissa confessed her love to Audrey. Audrey reciprocated, and the girls beamed with their smiles, as if there was no evil around. After breakfast, Melissa went for a walk and realized that when the ring lit up, she heard the maid's thoughts. She was drawn to the indignant dialogue of 3 other maids who wondered why they were celebrating the birthday of their mistress's daughter. They were hanging laundry on a line and discussing the girl, where the 3rd one expressed doubts about the presence of the master's blood in her. Melissa decided to try the ring and approached the maids, asking if they were talking about her, and one of them directly confirmed this fact, saying that it was bothering everyone, while the other 2 tried to stop her. Afterwards, she said that there was no point in them being nervous, because this child could not do anything to them. Melissa heard her when, through her complaints about low wages, the impudent maid thought that she was taking money from the wages of other maids and quietly approached the laundry basket, after which she jerked the necessary sheet out of there, scattering the stolen money around the area. The other 2 immediately remembered the rumor that someone was stealing gold coins. The impudent one immediately flared up, ordering them to shut up, because in her opinion, commoner maids should always remain poor. They did not remain in debt, making it clear that aristocratic birth meant nothing, because she was the same servant. The couple couldn't take it anymore and started fighting with the brazen woman who was stealing their money. There was gold lying around next to them, but it seemed that the hatred for the impudent one was much stronger than the thirst for money. Melissa, meanwhile, walked away, thanking God for the opportunity to start a new conscious life. She smiled evilly for the first time, promising herself to take revenge on everyone for what they did to her. The banquet was set up in the middle of the courtyard and began to gather momentum as guests arrived. The guests were busy with each other, and not one of them had yet congratulated the hero of the occasion. The event was named after Melissa, but her sister was the main event. Also, the current Duke of the family is James Durant, and also the father of Melissa and Rosemary. Also, there was his legal wife, Duchess Serena, who pretended to be a socialite, but was capable of animal cruelty. Not far from them, her sister Rosemary, whom everyone called the perfect lady, was shining in her outfit. She suddenly screamed, attracting the guests' attention, and thanked them for being present at her sister's birthday party. Smiling radiantly, the girl suggested raising a toast to the hero of the occasion. It was unexpected, and Melissa thought it was all painfully familiar, because she really knew how it would all end. Rosemary ran up to her sister and offered to pour her some juice, with all the sincerity she could muster. And then, yellow liquid poured into the girl's glass against the backdrop of her smiling sister. Melissa grinned evilly, thinking of how to play the situation to her advantage. In the distant past, or perhaps in a past life, the girl remembered this moment and her sister's true wishes very well. She drank the drink carelessly, supporting the glasses raised in her honor. However, realizing too late that something was wrong with him, she could not stand it and vomited in front of all the guests. With a reverent face, the sister stood opposite and imagined how disgusting the juice that had long since gone sour in the pantry could be. Melissa this time decided to outplay her evil sister and, taking the container of juice from her, made an offer to drink it together. She took her hand and pulled her closer to the guests, roughly understanding what would happen next. The resulting commotion attracted a large audience, who wondered out loud how quickly the Duke's mistress's daughter had grown up. Melissa, as she wished, became the center of attention along with her sister, and pulled her into the square until she bumped into one of the ladies. The girl immediately got her bearings, ignored the angry face, and along with the greeting expressed gratitude for attending the event. Not stopping there, Melissa admired the outfit the lady was wearing, and her anger changed to mercy. Having come to their senses, the entire crowd walked towards the girl, as if remembering the reason why they were there, and began to congratulate the girl to Rosemary's indignation. Rosemary couldn't do anything about it, and could only watch as congratulations mixed with compliments flew at Melissa from all sides. The hero of the occasion enjoyed herself because she was able to change the outcome of the event, where her sister was now out of place. Not one to rest on her laurels, Melissa proposed a toast to everyone present. The sound of glasses clinking was heard, and the girl's attention was directed to Rosemary, who was looking at the glass in confusion, knowing how nasty it was. The crowd of guests watched the event unfold intently, which Melissa took advantage of by pushing the glass towards her sister's lips. Rosemary had no choice but to drink the sour juice, barely keeping her face from twisting. The girl didn't have the strength to endure it. The drink, having reached her stomach, gushed back, right onto the dress of one of the guests that Melissa had praised. The sycophantic servant immediately jumped up to the Duke's hunched-over daughter, trying to help somehow. The guest was outraged by the behavior of the heiress. A scandal was brewing, while Melissa was happy about revenge, because she knew who her sister really was. That same day, after sunset, the girl walked along the corridors of the estate, thinking about the banquet. Rosemary tried to get rid of her, but ended up leaving the banquet herself, which was the first time. The girl looked at the full moon, realizing that she should not let revenge cloud her mind. Even though she had to avenge the betrayal, she imagined a grief-stricken Rosemary, whom she would generously keep from falling. As she looked at the ring, she still thought about being burned at the stake, wondering if that would be enough for her. However, she is far from the only one who needs to be given her due, and the girl decided to take Rosemary's place. Melissa was so excited about the day that she wanted to go for a walk, but on her way home, something caught her attention. There was definitely someone there near the fountain framed by bushes in the courtyard. Quietly approaching, the girl was able to see Marquis Lanza from behind. Wondering what he was doing there, Melissa noticed the ring, which was glowing brightly, as it always did when she needed to hear her thoughts. The Marquis, it turned out, was drinking wine alone and criticizing James for raising the price of the contract. The girl heard Lanza's thoughts, that James would not have been able to sell the opal if the Marquis had not brought it, and she understood everything. Opal is a powerful drug, the spread of which has resulted in a major problem for all social strata of society. The Duran family was connected to the criminal origins of the poison distribution, and this was worth taking advantage of. Melissa approached Lance at the moment when she promised that James would regret such an attitude towards him, and was not a little frightened when he saw his illegitimate daughter. Smiling slyly, the girl greeted the Marquis, approaching him from the side of the house. He apparently didn't hear, and Melissa repeated it again, followed by asking what he was doing here at such a time. Lance did not immediately recognize the girl as James's illegitimate daughter. Fear turned to anger, and he sternly asked why she was walking around here alone in the middle of the night, ignoring her questions. He was clearly testing her patience, and the girl endured, stroking the ring, because it was temporary. Melissa tried to impose herself on Lance again, asking why he was in a bad mood today. And while he was trying to come up with an answer, she anticipated him by asking the next question. Was it because of the powder that he was angry? He tried to deny it, but the girl clarified that wasn't this what he had talked to James about. The girl resorted to trickery, trying to play on the fear of revealing the secret and expressing concern, said out loud that she should turn to someone else from the banquet, since Lance did not know anything. At this point, the Marquis's hair stood on end. Could she possibly know anything about Opal? Lance decided to throw the kid a curveball and got her attention back by standing up and politely explaining that the conversation had been important. He continued to explain the importance of the conversation and the need for it to be kept secret. After all, it was important to James. Melissa knew she had to tread carefully, because if James found out, it would only hinder her. The girl agreed not to tell anyone anything, since the matter was so important, but on one condition. She smiled cheerfully and asked him to listen to a small request. The events moved forward to the next day, when Audrey was doing Melissa's hair. The girl thought that if she had gone back 7 years, then her mother must be alive. She recalled that at this time, her mother became so weak that she could not leave the room on her own. Having finished her thoughts, she turned to Audrey with a request to see her mother. The maid, having thought that her mistress was feeling well, was glad to answer the girl with consent. However, it is better to do this when James leaves and the girl understands that he will visit her mother again. After a while, Melissa knocked on the door of the room and, hearing her mother's voice, tried to hold back the tears that had appeared. Behind the door, her mother, wrapped in a shawl, sat at the table, smiling warmly at her daughter. The grown-up daughter, who had seen her death in the body of a child, uttered a greeting with difficulty. Before the mother had time to say hello in response, her daughter threw herself into her arms, clinging tightly to her mother's chest. In this Duran family home, she worked hard as a maid until James noticed her. As Melissa's mother told her, he forced her to enter into a permanent relationship with him in bed. The woman was unable to refuse, and, having become the employer's mistress, became an outcast among others, which is why she lost her mental and, after giving birth, her physical health, meeting her death early. But Melissa now understood that Rosemary had killed her, although she didn't yet know how she had done it. The mother began to play with her daughter and showered her with compliments, burning with love so much that it was difficult to express. The girl used to think that her mother might be angry with her because of the blood that belonged to the person she hated. And now she decided to check it out, to see how her ring could help, distracting her mother's attention to the good weather outside the window. Her mother's thoughts revolved around her weakness, because of which she could not spend more time with her daughter, and therefore considered herself a bad mother. The mother sank into thoughts about the reasons and truly wished that James would be gone. So much so that Melissa was frightened by the magnitude and blackness of this malice. Having prepared herself for anything, the girl asked directly if she hated her daughter. After waiting for an answer, she took her daughter into her arms and then whispered in her ear that she was the only light in her life. For the girl, these were such pure and true words that she thought that the power of her feelings alone would be enough to instantly wipe her enemies off the face of the earth. The ring helped her understand that her mother loved her with all her heart and always had, and Melissa swore that she would protect her this time. Afterwards, they started eating breakfast, chatting about how delicious food was when eaten together. Melissa recalled how much time they spent together when she was younger. There was another side to these memories. The day when she once again tried to win her father's love came to mind. He caught up with them in the rose garden, blocking the sun for both of them with his shadow, and the girl rushed to meet her father. James slapped the child across the face, not skimping on force, and Melissa flew away from him like a feather. Having removed the child as if she were an obstacle, he brazenly grabbed her mother and dragged her away with him as if she belonged to him. Remembering this, Melissa also remembered another incident when she went to his office and told the butler that she wanted to meet her father. He refused her and opened the door slightly, showing that the head of the house was busy, after which he asked the girl to go back to her room. Melissa couldn't even approach him on the street, as once again, while walking with Audrey, she tore herself away from her hand at the sight of her father. He walked into the house, ignoring her screams, since he had already seen her and had no desire to even just say hello to his daughter. Right before his eyes, Rosemary ran up to him and embraced him, and he reciprocated her feelings. James spoke warmly to her, ignoring the very existence of his second daughter, who was forced to watch this with tears in her eyes. Remembering how often she had seen this scene, Melissa realized her mistake. She should have realized who she was to James right away. After all, for those around her, she was the child of a whore, who constantly reminded her of this, forcing the child to try to understand why they hated her. James took possession of her mother by force, ruined her life, and used her like a thing. But why did all the hatred go to her and not to him? After finishing her breakfast, Melissa thanked her mother for the food, while her mother tended to her daughter, wiping her mouth with a napkin. The door to the room swung open with force, and Rosemary's mother, Serena Duran, appeared on the threshold. Mama stood up to greet the lady, but she swung her folded fan at her face with all her might. The blow was so strong that the woman fell to the floor as if she had been knocked down. Melissa ran to her mother, asking her to stop the beating, which greatly angered Serena. She grabbed the girl by the hair and with no less force hit her with the fan, aiming mainly at the head, not forgetting to shower the mother and daughter with curses. The mother tried to stand up for her daughter, but since she was very weak, she decided to fall at Serena's feet, begging for forgiveness for non-existent sins. Melissa, meanwhile, used the ring, hearing Serena's thoughts about how she would never forgive her for being so beautiful that James wanted her. The girl watched again as they insulted her mother, realizing that she could not protect her with her body, but vowing to take revenge on the entire rotten family so that they would want to die. Later, Melissa walked along one of the floors of the estate and heard the conversations of other maids. They considered the beatings to be well-deserved, and they actively discussed this, raising their voices a notch when they saw her daughter. She did not pay attention to this, noticing that there was some kind of commotion in the estate, and with the help of the ring, she realized that the queen had arrived. Serena was seriously worried, because she really wanted to marry Rosemary off to the prince as a bride despite her young age, and therefore tried to provide the queen with a royal reception. The girl remembered the lady's prohibition to leave the annex during the queen's visits, and wondered why she didn't want the queen to see Melissa. The ring readily lit up, as if expressing support for its owner in her plan to ruin Serena's plans. Meanwhile, the queen, accompanied by Serena Duran and a battalion of servants, walked deeper into the estate along a pre-laid carpet. Melissa was spying on them from above, smiling wickedly as she prepared to greet her personally. The girl followed the progress of the procession, which was located in the summer gazebo in the courtyard of the estate. Melissa was able to see Queen Sophia for the first time, who was known to her, and the nobility as a wise, generous woman who loved children. She often opened schools for both aristocratic and commoner children at her own expense. The queen was admired throughout the country not only for her kindness, but also for her gentle and easygoing nature. Melissa looked closely at Sophia, trying to understand why she would have such an incompetent son in the future. However, she decided that it did not concern her, and, having adjusted the ring, prepared for a personal meeting with the queen. It was not enough to introduce herself. Serena and Rosemary would try not to let her stay near the guest for long, and this meant that she really needed to please her, so much so that she would become interested in her. While Melissa was getting ready to go out, Rosemary, with her entire mouth stretched into a smile, fawned over Sophia. The queen noted that they had not seen each other for a long time and immediately heard how impatiently the girl was awaiting a new meeting with her, which Serena readily confirmed. Sophia's servants brought the case with the tiara, while she was saying that she needed to think about the proposal she had made. Serena and her daughter prepared for a positive answer, barely containing their joy, and asked if they were talking about her. The queen confirmed their guess and continued to reflect on the fact that the prince was old enough to have a bride. The servants opened the case with the crown princess's tiara, and at the same time, Serena and Rosemary's mouths opened in admiration. The mother had already tried on her daughter's crown, but the queen cooled her ardor. Trying to remain loyal and refuse gently, Sophia said that there was no need to rush, because the matter was especially important. The focus of attention suddenly shifted towards the noise at the entrance, where Melissa appeared, frightening the guards. Sophia was surprised by the appearance of an unfamiliar girl in the Duran house. Previously, she thought that only one child lived there. The girl made a sad, bashful face and asked for forgiveness for her appearance, since she did not know that there were guests in the house. The stepmother reacted immediately, ordering Melissa to return to her room, and the girl called her that before doing so. The queen was offended by this word, which was what the girl had been counting on. She asked Serena why she was this girl's stepmother, to which she did not want to answer. The queen took the initiative, noticing the awkwardness that flashed across Serena's face, and supported Melissa. She again apologized to Sophia for interrupting their tea party. Curtsying, raising her head, Melissa smirked. Her plan was working, and she introduced herself as the second daughter of James Durant, also saying that they were seeing each other for the first time. The queen thanked the girl for the warm welcome and, to the displeasure of Serena and her daughter, invited her to join. Seeing the hostess's displeased face, Sophia inquired about the reasons and realized that Serena did not want to include Melissa in the conversation. The mistress of the house began to explain who this girl was, but the queen interrupted her. She was well informed about Melissa, adding that the girl was too ill to meet with guests. Melissa, meanwhile, sat silently at the table in the summer gazebo, listening to the events unfolding around her. To her delight, Sophia insisted on her desire to get to know James's second child better. Melissa realized that the rumors about the queen were true, because knowing her origins, she easily allowed her to join the tea party. Serena was in a hurry to finish the interrupted conversation in her favor, and said that she agreed about the engagement. Sophia, putting the cup of tea on the saucer, again cooled the woman's ardor, reminding her that she would think carefully about this issue, after which she turned to the two sisters with a desire to ask a question, to which they readily agreed. They had to answer a difficult question, against the backdrop of the queen and the coveted crown lying on the table. Its essence was to find out how the girls would react if she were chosen as the crown princess. And if Melissa was pondering the meaning, Rosemary's hand immediately shot up, showing a desire to answer. The girl spoke without hesitation about the honor of bearing this title, and also that her mom and dad would be very happy about such a significant event. Sophia asked Melissa for an answer, but she was still thinking, because she understood that at her age, no one would think about the people and the country, which meant the answer should be childish, but deep. The girl decided to answer that this title would be a heavy burden for her. The queen was not prepared to hear such an answer, which is why it surprised her so much. Melissa continued that she would be happy and would do everything to support her prince husband. However, she continued her speech with words about the excitement in her soul, thoughts about what it means to be a worthy bride, to become a queen, and to behave appropriately, despite all the benefits. The queen's eyes widened even more in surprise as she realized how deep this girl's thoughts were. Melissa ended by promising to do her best to support the royal family and be a good wife. By that time, the queen had already melted, caressing the girl with an almost loving gaze. She gave a sign, and the maid, closing the case with the crown, took it with her, knowing that they would soon set out on their journey. Serena tried to find out the queen's answer to the question about the engagement. However, her answer was the same as before, but it sounded much firmer. Mother and daughter were discouraged until Sophia, thanking Melissa for her answer, invited her to her salon that same month. The girl became embarrassed and beamed, hearing such warm words for the first time from a stranger, and one of such rank. The queen was already leaving, but Serena, who did not give up, ran after her, trying to change her decision, since she hoped to get consent already during this tea party. Rosemary sat with a distant look, and her sister deliberately asked if she was upset only because the title had been lost. Melissa, having taken one last piece of cake, was already leaving when she heard a request to wait. Rosemary's voice sounded sad, but at the same time cold and cruel, so it made the girl turn around. The sister rushed towards her, knocking the half-eaten treat out of her hand. Smiling strangely, she asked Melissa to chat with her, and this after such a defeat. The girl was on guard, fully aware that her sister was planning something particularly cruel. Pretending to be the most innocent and clasping Melissa's hands in hers at her chest, she spoke of loneliness while her sister was alive and well. Having accepted the rules of the game, she smiled sheepishly and told Rosemary that she should have been more attentive, noting with fear that he could not hear her thoughts. She reached out to Melissa's head, feeling the unhealed wound from Serena's blow. Continuing to painfully feel the place of the blow, she said that she knew what her mother had done. Rosemary's attentive and tender eyes contradicted the words spoken about her sister's guilt, because it was not worth interfering with Serena. It was good that she didn't know. Melissa was already an adult in a child's body, and remembering past events, she remembered how Rosemary pretended to care by picking flowers for her mother. Later, with a smile on her face, she watched as Serena beat the girl for picking roses in the garden. Now, she was playing with Melissa again, promising that if she behaved well, she would not be touched. Rosemary was chattering about how happy she was about the understanding they had found when Melissa told her what she wanted to hear. The revenge was worth taking here and now, and Melissa passionately took her sister's hands, wanting to play with her sister as she played with her. She buried her face in her sister's hand, expressing concern about her ruined plan to become the prince's bride. The sister stroked Rosemary's cheek, saying words of comfort so softly that she no longer understood what was happening. Taking everything at face value, she admitted that she was upset by the uncertainty that arose after the conversation. However, she deliberately stepped on the cake, approached Melissa, and confidently declared that there were no other candidates for the prince's wife. Rosemary literally flew in her dreams, continuing to broadcast that no matter how much time passed, she would still become the prince's bride. She didn't forget about Melissa either, asking her if she thought the same, to which she received an affirmative answer. It was then that the girl remembered how she burned at the stake, and indeed, she would have looked great with the evil prince who executed the innocent girl without investigation. Rosemary pulled her out of her memories, expressing regret that she had delayed her sister so long. The servant interrupted the conversation, telling the girl that her mother was waiting for her to try on the dress she would wear to the salon. Having put on a friendly face, the sisters said goodbye to each other, carefully hiding their true attitude towards each other. A few days later, Melissa was drinking tea that Audrey brought her. While sipping the delicious drink, she thought that if she had made a good impression on the queen, then the next step was her salon. And Sophia's salon is an impressive embodiment of social life for the children of influential aristocrats. The girl was sure that if she showed herself well there, she would receive much more than the queen's support. However, she was burdened by the fact that she could not use the ring near Rosemary. Her thoughts on cause and effect were interrupted by Audrey, who brought in a personal invitation on a tray. Melissa couldn't believe her eyes. It was the queen's personal invitation to visit her salon, which came in confirmation of the words spoken at the tea party. Meanwhile, at the Durand family estate, the next round of events was preparing to unfold. James, sitting in his office, allowed the servant who announced Serena's arrival to let her in. He opened the wide door, decorated with carved gilding, after which James's wife entered the office. She asked him something he didn't yet know, whether the illegitimate child had really received an invitation to the Queen's salon. Another guest appeared at the door of the office, who immediately received a disapproving look from Serena as a greeting. Melissa walked slowly into James's office, while his wife openly said that she was against sending her to a salon without a good education. She walked closer to the table and greeted her father and stepmother, ignoring her words. With a beaming face, she told him the news he already knew. The Queen had invited her to her salon. She was curious about what he thought about it, and having voiced her desire to go, she prepared to eavesdrop on his thoughts through the ring. James noted that she, like her mother, had a very beautiful appearance, which meant he could use her. His thoughts also told Melissa that she was also his daughter, and if the Queen liked her, the Durand family would receive even more benefits. Meeting her father's gaze, she declared that she would definitely be able to please the Queen. To Serena's indescribable outrage, James allowed her to try her hand at Sophia's salon. Without embarrassment and without limiting herself in eloquence, the wife began to prove to him that this girl was no good, and that Rosemary was for all these exits. The head of the house did not even listen to her, ordering the servant to prepare everything for Melissa, as befits the daughter of a duke. As Melissa left her father's office, she couldn't help but glance back at Seren, who was torn apart by rage, with a grin. Returning to Audrey, the girl made plans for the upcoming event. She was going to attract the attention of many influential people, so that after him, no one would dare to consider her a nobody. After preparations, enjoying her appearance and her new lilac dress, the girl walked into the carriage prepared for the trip to her destination. Melissa sat down next to Rosemary, opposite her father, and although she was nervous, she was filled with confidence in her abilities. In the salon, they were politely greeted by a servant, while the girl tried to understand how she should behave at a tea party where the main visitors were children. During the meeting, the children got to know each other, establishing connections for the near future. Their parents, meanwhile, are usually busy bragging about their children to each other. Melissa saw for the first time the embodiment of the social life that she could only dream of before. Having parted ways with her sister, she approached a circle of young people who were heatedly discussing a new, unknown disease that had spread among the common people. At the peak of the conversation, unexpectedly for everyone, the queen appeared in the hall, asking everyone if they were having a good time. At the sight of her, the children turned to her at once and bowed as a sign of greeting and courtesy to Her Majesty. Sophia greeted Melissa, and when she asked what the conversation was about, she received an answer from the boy, who happily told her the essence of the conversation. This disease was named the disease of the empty, which cut into the girl's ears, since she knew very well what was being discussed. This is what they called drug addicts, who took opal, as a result of which withdrawal symptoms developed and people turned into empty shells. Melissa knew because soldiers told her about it during interrogation in her past life. It was then that she decided to speak out and turned to the queen and asked if she knew that this disease was caused by drugs. Sophia clearly didn't know about this and was very surprised. How did Melissa know about this? However, deciding that this was not important now, she asked the girl to tell in more detail about everything she knew. With her conversation with the queen, she attracted the attention of James and Lance, who was talking to him. The Duke was already anticipating a possible benefit for himself, seeing how briskly the girl was talking with Sophia. Meanwhile, Melissa shared her knowledge about the opal, which causes the disease itself. She briefly explained what happens when you take even a small dose, and that it is sometimes added to sweets, which caused horror in the eyes of the guy who was eating the cookies. The queen's gaze grew heavy, while jokes, fears, and other discussions began to circulate among the crowd of guests. Sophia was forced to confirm the girl's words, since the Crown investigation also came to the same conclusion. She dropped to all fours, closer to the girl's face, and asked how Melissa knew about everything. The girl said that she heard this from people, while James literally appeared from under the ground next to them, asking what the conversation was about. The daughter answered without hesitation that it was about opal, knowing that he was the one who supplied it. Hearing about the drug, Marquis Lance turned white, quickly remembering the candy he himself had given the girl. Smiling sincerely, Melissa's eyes glowed with a demonic light as she asked her father if she had done well. Sophia again asked the girl to tell her details about the drug, and the girl agreed. However, her shoulder was squeezed by her father's hand, who was standing behind her, as he needed to stop the girl. The Duke hastened to write off his daughter's speech as childish pranks, squeezing hard the hand that still held the child's frail shoulder. Melissa knew it would be a disaster if it turned out he was involved, and she was also determined to avenge her mother and her past life, in which she was burned alive after so many years of humiliation. Sophia stopped James, saying that even bits of information from a child's mouth could be the key to solving the mystery. Melissa made up her mind, and breaking free from her father's grip, ran to the queen. Reacting instantly, an officer blocked her path, despite the fact that a child was running towards the queen. The queen dismissed the officer and approached the girl, who was trying to show her something. Melissa opened her hand, which contained the very same candy with the drug, which the queen immediately guessed. The girl said that before Her Majesty was the cause of the people's most terrible disease. She continued that opal is distributed under the guise of something harmless, invisible to the authorities and any inspections. Melissa gave the candy to the queen, begging her to believe her, while her father tried to remain calm. The ring suggested the queen's thoughts. Melissa knew information that had not yet been disclosed, which meant it made sense to listen to her words. The main question that followed was the one that Lance had been so afraid of, namely, where did the child get this candy from? The answer was clear. Marquis Lance gave it to her, and the eyes of those present turned to him. He turned white when he saw the attention turn to him and wondered what would happen next. Sophia asked loudly if he had treated Melissa to this candy that contained opal. Melissa promised that evening in the courtyard that she wouldn't tell anyone, and he remembered what the girl had asked him for in exchange for her silence. Even then, he was not himself from the dialogue with the girl, because it was as if he was talking to an adult in the body of a child. Melissa then asked him to give her something sweet, completely in keeping with the image of a little girl, and in fact, knowing what kind of candy he carries with him. The Marquise wanted to ask the servants to prepare something for her, but she stopped him. The girl said that she was so hungry that she wouldn't be able to stand it until everything was ready, and that she allegedly accidentally noticed a candy wrapper sticking out of the jacket. Melissa began to furiously ask for candy, while Lance tried to convince her of his choice. She caught him, because if he hadn't given her the candy, she would have gone and told everyone about it. The Marquis wondered what would happen to the child if she swallowed the pure opal that was under the candy wrapper. And he realized that this was possible, and that this was his way out, after which he gave Melissa the candy, explaining his stubbornness by saying that he had saved them for his daughter. Even when the girl had run away to her room, he thought with a smile about her death, which no one would regret. The excitement left him, and he sat down on the fountain railing to finish his wine. The only witness to this transaction was the full moon, hanging indifferently over the Duran estate. And now, at the royal court, this candy appeared in Melissa's hands, before the eyes of the queen. He wondered with horror why she had not eaten it and remained alive, and what would happen to him now. Unable to bear the tension, he pointed his finger at her and shouted that she knew everything in advance and set him up. A second officer appeared next to the queen, while the rest of the guard had already invisibly surrounded the crowd of guests. Sophia could not tolerate his screaming, ordering him to be silent in such a voice that everyone fell silent. Covering her face with a fan, her furious eyes incinerated Lance, and she finished her speech by ordering him to interrogate the culprit in detail. Following the instructions, the royal guard immediately grabbed the Marquise by the arms, eliminating the possibility of escape. The queen ordered the officer standing nearby to examine the candy for the presence of drugs. The Marquis was taken away amid his own cries. He was distressed in his attempts to understand where she had learned about everything. Finally, the silent Melissa rewarded Lance with a cold grin, rejoicing at the successful course of events. The carriage carrying James and his daughters returned to the estate, and the servant hurried to open the door for the master. Melissa flew out of the open door, tumbling from a strong kick, trying to group herself so as not to get injured. An angry James yelled at his daughter that he hadn't expected anything else, realizing that she had imprisoned his supplier. With her dress dirty, having taken a decent hit, and sitting in the mud, Melissa smiled at the revenge she had accomplished. This angered the Duke even more, and he grabbed her by the dress and lifted her off the ground, shouting in her face how dare she look at him like that. Without waiting for an answer, James threw her away from himself like a doll, and Melissa was lucky that a servant was in the place where she was flying. Without thinking about calming down, he kept shouting that she was only creating problems and ordered that she be locked in the room. However, the smile did not leave the girl's face, and getting up, she got ready to go home. She understood that all she could do was wait, because the Marquis would not drown himself. He would definitely betray James, and then justice would prevail. As the queen said, a small detail in the form of a candy turned out to be the key to solving the entire investigation. Lance's interrogation and the direct street allowed the investigation to be completed as quickly as possible. The merchant ship and the warehouse where the drugs were being transported and stored were seized, and the personnel were detained by the authorities. Of course, the knights did not pass by the Duran house, coming for James. The weather was fine, and Melissa, locked in her room, was passing the time by the window. She waited for them, and finally, the authorities came for the man who destroyed her mother's life. She watched with indescribable pleasure as the knights led James away, accompanied by Serena's howls. Through the window, the daughter happily said goodbye to her father, hoping to never see him again. Audrey distracted her from creating, informing the girl that someone had come to see her too. Entering the room, the young man introduced himself as a knight of Her Majesty Sophia. Melissa heard his thoughts, which expressed doubt that she was the Duke's second daughter, but nevertheless patiently awaited his decision. Finally, he approached the girl and offered her hand, voicing the Queen's order to take her to the castle. Audrey was frightened by such events. However, the girl looked so confident, as if she had everything under personal control. As she passed her mother's room, she met her worried gaze. The daughter smiled and followed the knight, anticipating her victory. There turned out to be two knights, which Melissa found out when she approached the carriage, after which one of them helped her get inside. Sometime later, a resisting Serena and Rosemary were almost dragged to the same carriage. Looking at the ring, Melissa thought that the days had been flying by too quickly since she had returned, and the Duran family, to her delight, is falling apart brick by brick. Melissa thought about Rosemary, who would soon be in her place, for which the girl did everything she could. After some time, a luxurious royal castle appeared in the carriage window. Melissa was overjoyed, because the balance of power had changed dramatically, and she had done it all herself, albeit not without the help of the mysterious ring. But Serena and Rosemary were very depressed by this turn of events. Not only would James be imprisoned, or even executed, but there would be no sign of the girl's engagement to the prince. The head of state called for silence, and opposite his throne, two knights accompanied the culprit. The king asked his wife if it was the same girl who helped them. Noticing Melissa, she tried to keep a neutral expression on her face as she stood in one of the front rows. Remarque began his speech with a brief explanation of the investigation into the hollow disease and stated that they had recently received a very important clue. He went on to explain how it became clear that the drug was the cause of the illness. Also, that all those involved were found and arrested, and the main organizer was now in front of the king and his guests. The king's sentence instantly deprived Duke James of his past life, because it was the title he had taken away. At the same time, he confiscated all the property of the Duran family, and if anyone has any objections, they can appeal right now. Serena collapsed on the floor, bursting into tears that Melissa found sweet, while her daughter Rosemary consoled her. Melissa remembered that in her past life, she had been accused of this, thanks to her worst father in the world, and it also expressed the hope that they would never see each other again. However, when he was led past the girl, he looked at her intently, and the girl withstood that gaze. No one objected, and the king publicly thanked everyone who helped solve the case. Then, he turned to Melissa and asked her to come closer to the throne. The girl obediently stepped forward, and Sophia came down from the pedestal of the throne to meet her. The queen personally thanked the girl who solved a very serious problem with one candy. The king also praised her, noting that it was not easy to tell about her family's crimes. Melissa was very happy. She was able to destroy her hated father and become the heroine of the kingdom. Amid Melissa's praise, Rosemary tried to support her inconsolably crying mother. Distracted by the royal guests, the girl saw a strange man whom she did not know. He met her gaze as she recalled if there was anyone from the royal family with black hair. Meanwhile, the king turned to Melissa with a question of reward and asked if she wanted anything, and the girl, without thinking twice, asked to be made the heir of the Duran family. The king wondered if her request violated the terms of James's punishment, while Rosemary watched the events unfold with fear. He objected to the girl, saying that the Duran family had nothing left, and he could only give her a title. Melissa lowered her head sadly, thanking the royal family for their concern. The girl chose her words carefully, and her next step in the conversation with the king was the desire not to let the Duran family name sink into oblivion. She acknowledged the correctness of the king's judgment and asked him to listen to her request. Melissa offered to use her family's funds and land to help people affected by drugs. Expressing a desire to atone for her father's guilt, she knelt down and folded her hands in a pleading gesture, depicting complete remorse. The royal cane hit the floor, agreeing with Melissa's point. He was surprised and glad to hear such a request from the lips of a little girl, and raising his voice, proclaimed such a decision to be fair. Sophia helped the girl up, and the king promised not to touch the mansion and the land around it, since they now belonged to the noble girl. Melissa thanked the royal family, enjoying her victory and looking forward to the changes that were to come. The girl understood that the promise made to the core of the aristocracy would certainly be fulfilled, and the Duran family now belonged to her. Returning to the estate, Melissa handed the royal decree to the head butler, after reading which his face lengthened in surprise. She smiled and told everyone present that they should now listen to her as the new mistress of the house. A whisper ran through the crowd of maids, wondering if this was true, and to everyone's surprise, the head butler Franz addressed her as his mistress. He bowed to her, saying that he would carry out all her orders according to the royal decree. Melissa smiled at him, saying that she was glad to meet him, and he replied that he was always at her service. He invited her into the office to discuss their next plan of action, when they were stopped by Serena's cry as she burst into the lobby. The woman screamed that she was the Duchess of the Duran family, while Rosemary stood silently behind her. She justified her behavior and claimed by the fact that the child of a whore cannot be the Duchess of this family and house. Melissa cooled her ardor by reminding her that she was only the Duke's wife and was not hereditary. She ended her speech by emphasizing the royal decree, which even she would have to take into account. Serena's loyal servants rushed towards her, shouting insults at the illegitimate girl. Melissa clapped her hands, causing everyone to shut up and turn their attention to her. So she informed everyone that all property had been confiscated by the king, and now it was necessary to organize what was left, namely, to sell unnecessary things in order to keep the family budget afloat. Melissa glanced around the maid-filled lobby and smiled coldly, waiting a moment before giving the people who had humiliated her their due. Even those maids who had been particularly bold in their humiliation of the little girl grew quiet in fear next to Serena. Melissa knew their faces well, and, pointing her finger at them one by one, announced that they were fired. A little later, she added that they should vacate the rooms they occupied in the estate that very day. The next order was that those who did not agree with her new title could leave immediately, since, besides, she could not support everyone. Having finished, she went to her office, while Franz instructed the two dismissed maids to pack their things immediately. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, they started wailing along with Serena, trying to attract the attention of their departing mistress. Rosemary seemed frightened, silently watching what was happening behind her mother. Melissa informed Serena and Rosemary that they would be selling the now unnecessary dresses and jewelry, and therefore they were obliged to give it all to Franz. The former mistress could not bear it and screamed that she could not and would not dare to do this to her. Here, Melissa enjoyed asking her about the reasons for such behavior and suggested that the reason was rooted in living as a commoner. Already sitting in her office, the girl thought that in addition to revenge and pleasure, she would really have to manage the estate wisely. To begin with, she instructed Franz to make a decision about the remaining servants and those who agreed to work for her, after which the head butler suggested that the girl prepare a chair of the appropriate height for her. She gratefully agreed, and was then delighted to see Audrey enter the office, having just prepared lunch for Melissa. She was calm about the girl gobbling up her lunch. Finally, events had unfolded according to a fair scenario. Audrey crouched down, taking Melissa's hand in hers, which even worried her. The woman proudly informed the girl that she had grown a lot in recent months. Melissa felt the warmth coming from the ring, persistently spreading from her hand throughout her body. Audrey continued to wonder out loud when the girl had managed to grow up and achieve such greatness. And then memories of past events that she shouldn't have remembered flooded Melissa's mind. She saw her past when Audrey first carried her into the room where her mother was resting. The maid carefully placed the child on the bed, trying not to cause even a single inconvenience. Melissa saw this, somehow being invisibly nearby. She saw her mother call her Melissa for the first time, holding her daughter wrapped in swaddling clothes on the rivers. Mom thanked Audrey because thanks to her, she was able to give birth to Melissa and endure the labor. The woman, weakened by childbirth, asked Audrey to protect Melissa because she understood that she would not last long. The girl's mother spoke frankly to the maid about her concerns about her poor health, not forgetting to mention James, and Audrey promised to protect Melissa and treat her like her own child. This is how Melissa learned about the promise her mother and Audrey had made to work together for her future. The ring transported her to another day, when little Melissa was looking at flowers with her mother's friend. Passing workers recognized Audrey and called out to her, while she discreetly covered the child with her body. They greeted each other, and the girl asked her friends how things were going, since Rosemary had just been born. They responded by sarcastically asking about the well-being of the prostitute who had given birth to Melissa, for whom Audrey had left her post as head maid. The girl was present during the conversation, as if in reality, surprised to learn about the position of a servant, which she left to go to work in the outbuilding. The maids continued to laugh and mock, expressing false sympathy for their friend, who now had to take care of Melissa's mother. Their shadows loomed over the little girl, as one of the maids suggested throwing the child away. Audrey stood up for the child, saying that the girl had nothing to do with these events. She asked her former friends to treat Melissa with respect, because she was the same Duke's daughter as Rosemary. The girls became angry, and one of them reminded Audrey that she was no longer the head maid, and that she should not lecture them anymore. They continued to claim that they had come to warn her, because soon the girl and she would be thrown out of the estate along with her. Besides, Rosemary couldn't be compared to that dirty bastard, so she was the one who had to show respect, after which the ex-girlfriend lifted the bucket of slop. She emptied the bucket, splashing it all over Audrey, not forgetting to accompany her action with insults. After that, the maids left, and the mother's friend carefully asked the girl if she was okay. Melissa, childishly noticing the wetness of her friend's outfit, rushed into her arms despite the fact that she could get dirty. Audrey couldn't stand it, and with difficulty holding back tears from the pure love of this girl, hugged her like her own daughter. She understood that a lot of dirt would be poured on the girl simply because she was born out of wedlock, and if her mother died, then there would be no one left except her. And this dirt will be poured out by the entire Duran family, including Rosemary, who will eventually grow up with the same attitude towards her as Serena. Melissa, who had been watching these scenes, only now realized that Audrey had been like a second mother to her, working hard in this mansion and taking care of her. She also did not forget about her mother. Despite such a cruel environment for many years, Audrey always protected the girl as best she could, ignoring attacks from the Duran family and other maids. And then Melissa's ring brought her back to the estate office, where her mother's friend was trying to get her attention next to her. Putting it down to dizziness, the girl smiled and reassured Audrey. She suggested opening the window to let in some fresh air, and the girl happily agreed. Melissa heard the girl's thoughts. She was very glad that after so many attacks and bullying, she became the head of the Duran estate. And even in this future, Audrey promised that she would not leave the girl alone and would serve as a maid as before. Melissa drew the girl's attention to herself, intending to thank her. She had already drawn up a new contract, which she wanted to give to Audrey, but she held it back for the moment. Melissa asked the maid to resign from her position as a maid, which made her turn white, frightened by such a decision. However, before Audrey could say anything, the girl handed her a new contract. She told her that she saw her in the position of head maid, as she needed a professional in that position. Also, while she was reading the written confirmation, Melissa informed Audrey that she was not just a servant to her. The girl clarified, as if she didn't know whether she was the head maid. Audrey was surprised by this turn of events and asked how she knew, to which Melissa said it was a secret. The girl came up to the balcony and said directly that Audrey was the only one she could rely on and trust, along with her mother. The woman agreed to the new mistress's offer and swore to serve her faithfully. Later in the evening, Franz brought his hostess a list of unnecessary things, because by the grace of His Majesty, the Duran family was left with only the house and the territory. During these days, Melissa was getting rid of Serena and Rosemary's wealthy fortune, as well as unnecessary and unwanted servants. Here, Audrey proved herself to be a true professional, skillfully and effectively managing a small number of people. Even the atmosphere has changed, becoming brighter and warmer compared to the past. A pleasant fresh breeze was blowing through the corridors, and a month had already passed since Melissa was called to the royal castle. The girl and Audrey finally went out into town to do some shopping, discussing what was happening in the estate. Entering the boutique, the senior maid expressed her joy at the dress she had bought for her mistress. She insisted on buying a custom dress. However, Melissa did not want to buy even that, as her financial situation was difficult. She also said that Franz had forced her to buy this dress, citing her new position, and Audrey agreed and suggested waiting for the carriage on the street, where they went out. The girl sat down on a bench asking Audrey to buy her a newspaper, after which her attention was drawn to an alley. He wouldn't have been anything special in appearance if terrible events hadn't happened there. It was there, not long ago, that the victims of Opal literally lay, living out their lives in convulsions. Melissa felt sorry for them and was glad that the city center was now much quieter. The head maid returned with the newspaper, and the girl, having read it quickly, did not detect any unrest. True, after James's arrest, distrust of the aristocracy grew, and before she had time to think about it, a stranger approached her and asked if she was an aristocrat. He was an unpleasant-looking man, and his facial expression, as well as his tone of voice, expressed open aggression. He didn't need her answer, because he was already taking out of his pocket a sealed bottle with an unknown liquid inside. Standing a step away from the girl, he swung the bottle, shouting that his son had died because of them. Audrey reacted instantly, covering Melissa with herself, but then someone else intervened in the situation, preventing the man from throwing the bottle at them. He knew the guy's name and turned to him in surprise, trying to break free from his grip. Nick, which was the guy's name, urged the man to calm down and not make a scene in the city center. Despite his hatred of aristocrats, he took away the bottle of liquid and added that his son would be sad if the soldiers captured him. The man couldn't take it anymore and started crying, covering his eyes with his hand, while the guy began to calm him down. He sent him to the bar, adding that he himself would soon come there. The stranger listened to the guy's words and went home, while Nick remained in place. He turned to Melissa and Audrey, and taking off his hat, bowed and asked for forgiveness for the old man's behavior. Nick told them about the tragedy in his family, because after her son, his mother also left this world, unable to withstand the blow. Audrey asked the guy to straighten up and thanked him for helping resolve the situation. The guy seemed happy that the conflict was resolved without involving the knights. Then a carriage pulled up for the girls, and they began to gather up the purchased things lying on the bench. Smiling pleasantly, Nick said goodbye to them, as did the girls to him. And then the guy looked at the carriage, where he saw a very familiar symbol. It was the coat of arms of the House of Duran, and the boy began to guess who he had just saved. Trying to get ahead of the girl who was already entering the carriage, he shouted to attract her attention. Melissa and Audrey looked around in surprise, not knowing what to expect from such behavior. Nick asked if she was the same Melissa Duran who had recently become famous. Having received an affirmative answer, he bowed to the girl and asked her to allow him to work for her. Audrey said they were grateful for the help, but the issue could not be resolved quickly. Meanwhile, Melissa thought that for his help, he could at least be heard. She asked him why he was so eager to work for her, and he admitted that he owed her. Without waiting for further questions, Nick explained that his brother had fallen victim to disgrace. He found himself bedridden and awaiting death as a release from his torment. However, soldiers suddenly came to their home and took their brother to a rehabilitation center for treatment. He ended his story by saying that all of this was possible thanks to Melissa. The girl was pleasantly surprised that her words helped someone, because she said them to raise her reputation. Nick literally flew up to the girl and took her hands in his palms. He leaned over to her and thanked Melissa, because citizens like him did not have the money to send their loved ones to the doctor. And she helped save a lot of people, and his brother is all the family he has left. Nick got down on one knee and asked for a chance to repay his debt by serving her for the rest of his life. Melissa expressed understanding and couldn't help but say that she was, after all, the daughter of the man who had caused his brother to be in such a state. Nick surprised her with his answer, in which he said that this did not bother him, because she should not be responsible for the Duke's villainy. Moreover, it was she who exposed this evil and saved ordinary citizens from horror. Warmth spread from the ring across her hand, as if prompting the girl to make the right decision. She agreed to take the guy and headed to the carriage with Audrey. Melissa smiled cheerfully and called him to follow her, since he wanted to work so much. Nick rose from his knee and clenched his fist, shouting joyfully as if he had won. A few days later, Audrey brought a package of documents into Melissa's office. The girl was quite tired, stretching out her arms as if pushing away from a pile of papers. Audrey suggested that she take a break, and in the meantime told her the news. Nick became Franz's student, and such a student that Franz often praises him, which is very unusual. The guy quickly found a common language with all the staff, and, what's more, he grasped the head butler's lessons with talent. Melissa was glad to hear this. The ring had once again prompted her to make the right decision. Having decided to take a walk around the office, she accidentally looked out the window and was surprised by what was happening there. Outside the window, she was attracted by the distinctive outfit of her stepmother, who was getting ready to go somewhere. The girl thought about it, because this happens very often. Audrey called out to Melissa, asking if something was bothering her, and she asked her if it seemed to her that her stepmother often disappeared from home. Audrey answered positively, and although there was little information, she said that, according to rumors, her stepmother was dating someone in the city. True, no one knows his identity or the purpose of meeting him. Audrey remembered Nick, because he could be entrusted with this task, since he knows the city well and loves to collect gossip. The girl opened his personal card to remember what he had written about himself. There I saw that Nick worked in the Merchants Guild, which meant he was good at collecting information. Melissa agreed to give him this task and asked the head maid to call him into the office. Soon the guy came to her, and she apologized for being interrupted from work and said that there was a task for him. Melissa asked if he knew her stepmother and if he could recognize her facial features in a crowd. Nick asked if he was talking about Serena, and his face took on an unpleasant expression, as if he had remembered something nasty. The girl immediately said that the woman had hated her all her life, which meant she had to be careful with her, especially now. She continued to talk about her stepmother's strange and regular departures to unknown destinations. Nick, meanwhile, was thinking about and remembering what was said in order to complete the task accurately, and Melissa asked him to find out everything he could, and if that was impossible, she would not blame him for it. The guy pounded his chest with his fist, declaring that for him, it was as easy as pie. He continued to boast that every nook and cranny of the city was his home. Meanwhile, the stepmother was already in one of the houses in the city. She leaned against the unknown man's shoulder as he read the deeds for the mine. He expressed uncertainty about this step, but Serena assured him that a girl without an education would not even understand what had happened. And the man, laughing disgustingly, admitted that he didn't have anything special that would be enough to thank her. It is true that he had something hidden away, which he gave away to the woman's delight. It was a precious perfume from a neighboring country that had not previously been sold here. Serena was overjoyed and leaned against the shoulder of the man who was hugging her. Meanwhile, events unfolded in the pub, where Nick went first. Before he even got there, he had already received an offer for a drink, but he limited himself to a greeting and continued his task. He leaned against the bar counter and greeted the pretty girl running the bar. Taking a couple of glasses of drink, he moved towards the lonely man, which attracted his attention. He met Nick with the accusation of working for the aristocrats, but he paid no attention to it. Having put the glass down for the informant, he sat down opposite and declared that he needed to find out something. Nick asked directly if he could sell information about Mrs. Serena, who had recently been in town. The informant waved his hand and took the offered money, agreeing to the deal. In return, he gave Nick a business card of one person. He added to the card that the former Duchess was crazy about her show-off son. Nick realized that things were taking a serious turn, because many people knew the emblem on the card. This is the coat of arms of the Beltran family, one of the wealthiest families in the country that was involved in import business, tax evasion, and other shady dealings. The familiar company again attracted the attention of Nick, who was passing by. One of the guys asked if he worked at Ms. Melissa's estate. Nick couldn't resist, and, in addition to an affirmative answer, told that he was the head butler's apprentice. The second guy from the company expressed his hatred towards the aristocrats, and Nick remembered that he worked with the Beltran family. He playfully hugged the guy and asked about his aristocrat, whether he had said something wrong to him again. Without waiting for an answer, he called the waiter and offered to order a drink and chat about it, after which, pretending to guess, going through the names of families, he supposedly accidentally stopped at Beltran. The guy believed him and began to express indignation about the nonsense that the youngest son of the head of the family was talking, thereby telling the details to Nick. Returning to the Duran estate, the guy already had a report prepared on the results of the mission. He approached his stepmother's office, mentally constructing an appeal to her. Nick opened the office doors and came face to face with the maid, surprising her quite a bit. She asked him what his business was, and also made it clear that he had missed Serena. Nick was about to leave a letter of justification for Beltran which he brought on the table, but he saw that the office was in chaos. The maid explained that Serena was in a terrible mood and refused the offer of help. Instead, she asked him to go with her to the pastry shop he had shown everyone earlier. Nick noted with displeasure that although he had heard a lot about her, real deeds spoke about her much more. The guy left the letter on the dressing table and noticed the variety of perfumes standing there. Among them, an unusual bottle stood out, which was not in the history of purchases of the mansion, which he helped Franz to put together. The information was obtained, and, noticing Melissa in the yard, he rushed towards her like a bullet. She and Audrey were just finishing a conversation with a citizen when Nick called out to her. He ran towards her along the path from the side of the mansion, jumping and shouting her name. Melissa asked where he came from, and the guy explained that he really wanted to find her. Nick leaned over to her conspiratorially and told her that he had learned a lot of interesting things about Serena. The Duchess is not only dating a man from their Beltran family, but is also obsessed with him. However, it is worth continuing this conversation in the office. A little later, Melissa, accompanied by Nick and Audrey, walked into the study. Franz was already waiting for her there, apologizing for his sudden appearance and saying that he needed to discuss one matter. Seeing Nick, he assumed that she had an important conversation with him and suggested that they come later, to which he received an offer to participate in it. Melissa explained to Franz that Nick was going to report the results of the investigation regarding Serena. The guy gave her a similar report that he had recently written after returning from a mission. The girl summed up Serena's relationship with the man out loud, causing Franz's surprise. He coughed, putting his fist to his mouth. It was so unexpected. Nick continued for Melissa, telling about the presence of very expensive perfumes and jewelry schematically drawn in the report, which were not purchased with Duran's money. The girl asked if she had received them from the man she was having an affair with, to which Nick replied in the affirmative. He continued to tell what he had learned. Her lover was none other than the son of the head of Beltran, named Mason. This was indicated by the fact that, quite recently, the first to receive a license to import these perfumes was the Beltran Trading House. Nick was able to find out through his connections in the Merchant Guild. Melissa was impressed with Nick's work, as his report was well-structured, contained sketches and evidence, and all in a couple of days. She expressed her sincere gratitude to the guy for such an excellent job. Nick was overjoyed, thanking Melissa for such a wonderful review. The girl asked Franz about his thoughts on this matter, and he said with heaviness in his voice that treason is a serious crime in the aristocratic world. Serena still has a husband because she did not file for divorce, which means she had no right to start a new relationship, and if this is found out, the family's reputation will be even lower. Melissa, sipping her tea, said without interest that before that happened, something needed to be done. At this point, Nick pulled an envelope out of his pocket, explaining that it was an addendum that she needed to look at. Opening the paper that lay inside, he asked Franz if he knew what it was. The head butler was horrified when he looked at the contents of the paper. It was the missing mine rights that he wanted to discuss with Melissa, as they gathered all the papers to return the Duran property to the royal family. The paper was original, and there was no doubt that Serena had stolen it from the house. Nick reported that he found it in the Merchants Guild, among a stack of documents on the change of ownership. Melissa asked if this document was supposed to be on the estate, and Franz confirmed it. Nick also said that a stack of papers was brought by a man from the Beltran family, while the senior butler exclaimed that both parties to the transaction must be present along with the notary for such a procedure. The guy agreed with him, but clarified that the documents were found on a shelf where the procedure was replaced by cash payments. The head butler was surprised that this worked even with the transfer of property. Nick asked them not to worry, because even if it was by accident, he had managed to invalidate the deal. Franz exploded with compliments, which he addressed to the guy for such help. Melissa knew that if the deal had gone through, it would have been difficult to even predict the consequences, so she already knew that Mason received the title deed from his stepmother. However, she clarified such a serious accusation with Nick, which he confirmed. Melissa thanked everyone present from the bottom of her heart for preventing a major problem. While Serena was preening in front of the mirror, the girl asked Nick if he knew when they would meet next. The guy thought about it, analyzing the frequency of their meetings in his head, and assumed that the next one would be tomorrow. Melissa smiled happily. It was so soon. She suggested asking them directly about everything and asked Nick to go with her, to which he readily agreed. The next day, wearing hooded cloaks, Melissa and Nick tracked down Serena's carriage. After the stop, Melissa's stepmother came out and, as if nothing had happened, pulled the hood over her head and went to her goal. After waiting a little, the guy opened the doors of the building, letting Melissa go ahead. As she entered, she thought with pleasure about her dream of paying this woman back that was coming true. After all, this is her last day as Duchess, and Melissa didn't even have to do anything. In Mason's apartment, Serena sat next to him in her underwear, throwing her dress off onto the floor. She was enjoying his company when Nick slammed the door open and announced the issue of transferring ownership of the mine. Serena screamed, while the heir of Beltran fearfully asked if the guest was from the guild. Then Melissa entered the room from the shadow of the doorway, wishing the lovers a good evening. She took off her hood and addressed her stepmother as nothing less than dear. Serena, recognizing her stepdaughter, had her face distorted with anger, losing all sense of shame. Melissa walked inside, deliberately stepping on the dress that was lying on her, and asked reproachfully how she could have fun when the family was going through hard times. The girl saw her real face for the first time and told her straight out how pathetic she was. Covering her nakedness and knowing what this story smelled like, the stepmother asked what she was doing here. The ring was set ablaze with vengeance, and Melissa said she was there to punish her for the affair. Serena tried to justify herself, but the girl replied that no matter how you look at it, it was cheating. She continued to think out loud. Even though they were the only witnesses, she had evidence. Mason and Serena listened silently, as if awaiting their fate. She took out imported perfume from under her dress, sarcastically asking if she got it from him. The stepmother blushed, thinking that she had to urgently run through the back door. But Melissa reported that there were soldiers already waiting for them, all there and around the building. The girl and Nick had warned them long ago and planned the operation together. Mason suddenly jumped up, wanting to check if the girl was bluffing. Seeing the soldiers, he turned back to Melissa as she announced their greatest crime. Nick took the mine title deeds out of the envelope and showed them to both of them, and the girl voiced an illegal attempt to transfer them to another person. Serena tried to say something that she didn't, but Melissa finished for her, assuming she didn't know. The woman asked in horror what she was trying to achieve, while disgusting words about the girl were spinning in her thoughts. Melissa smiled vindictively because Serena asked herself how the girl knew what she was thinking. The stepmother called her a monster, and the girl asked who the monster really was. She recalled how Serena beat her sick mother, and despite her age, time after time, she dealt sharp and cruel blows to the woman lying on her knees in front of her. Melissa approached her stepmother and asked if she was still a monster. And now she sits in front of her, so pitiful and defenseless, and all because Mason deceived her. The one who had been rushing around the apartment, upon hearing the speech about himself, stopped in confusion. The girl continued, giving the example of the perfume she took with her. They checked the composition and found a place for poison, which was added after production. Mason slapped his forehead, lamenting why she couldn't poison herself and die. It was a good blow to the soul, which literally incinerated the stepmother on the spot, because she did not believe her stepdaughter until the very end. Melissa mercilessly rubbed salt into the wound by reminding her that she was a duchess and had to take control of the house into her own hands. After which she asked a fair question. How could someone like her restore the family estate? Finally, Melissa advised her to surrender to the soldiers while she worked on restoring the estate and affairs. The girl turned around to leave, asking Nick to call the soldiers. Serena got out of bed, quietly grabbed a knife from the nightstand, and called out to the girl. Having blamed her for all the misfortunes, the stepmother, clutching the weapon with both hands, swung at her stepdaughter, shouting that she should have been killed in childhood. Nick's reaction was faster than Serena's blow, and the blade pierced his arm. The stepmother swung her arms again, screaming hysterically for the guy not to bother her. At that moment, soldiers burst into the room, demanding that the lawlessness be stopped, and quickly subdued the violent woman. Melissa immediately began to bandage the wound, but Nick, not paying attention to her, was interested in only one thing. Was she hurt? While Mason and Serena were being escorted to the carriage, the heiress of the estate gave Nick a dressing down, ordering him not to expose himself anymore if he wanted to be useful to her. Following the investigation and trial, for treason and attempted appropriation of royal property. The stepmother was stripped of her title and sent to a mountain monastery where she would spend the rest of her life. Sometime later, while walking down the corridor, Melissa met Nick, who informed her that her mother had moved to the main building. Serena's room was well tidied, and the girl settled her mother there. Here, together with her, Audrey, and Nick, she was supposed to recover and live in peace. Thus, Melissa was able to get rid of two of her most powerful and hated enemies. As usual, Mom gently patted her daughter's cheeks when she came to visit her. She didn't know that Rosemary, standing in the shadow of the door, next to the room, was watching this scene, holding a bottle of something in her hands. Now she was in Melissa's place, and she didn't have the same attitude towards herself that her sister had from her family. Rosemary was called out to in alarm by a passing maid, which was not at the right time. The girl put on a cheerful smile, and turning around, quietly hid the bottle in the pocket of her dress. The maid informed her about a letter that had arrived in her name, to which Rosemary asked to make her some tea. The maids who remained to work for Melissa were sincere and tried to support Rosemary by making her a cake. They asked the girl to at least cheer up a little, despite the difficult time for her. Taking pity on Rosemary, one of them said that it was very difficult to lose two parents at such a young age. The second one continued that there was nothing to be done about it, but one could try not to lose heart. They did not know that in her dark thoughts, a plan for revenge was maturing, and now she was criticizing the maids for the conversation that had become boring to her. The only thing that brought Rosemary joy was that she would soon be able to see her sister's crying face. Pretending to smile again, she inquired about the letter the maid had mentioned. Seeing that it was from Prince Kevin, Rosemary really cheered up. In the letter, the prince was worried about her health and asked permission to come and see her in a few days. She asked the maids to prepare everything to answer it and did not answer the question of who the letter was from. A few days later, Melissa was walking through the hallways of the estate with Nick. Suddenly, through the window, she saw the royal carriage with Prince Kevin, to whom Rosemary was joyfully walking, not having bothered to inform Melissa of his arrival. Suddenly, through the window, she saw the royal carriage with Prince Kevin, to whom Rosemary was joyfully walking, not having bothered to inform Melissa of his arrival. Now she understood why Nick had been so excited when he had popped into her office. The sister, as if nothing had happened, asked why she took so long to meet the guest. Kevin, seeing the new owner of the estate, greeted her, noting that he was communicating with her for the first time. Melissa was beside herself with rage, but she understood well that she should not be rude to the prince, even if this visit was not agreed upon with her. However, something completely different angered her. She would have to bow her head before the man who executed her, albeit at a different time, under different circumstances. Melissa swallowed her pride and confirmed their first meeting, bowing her head and introducing herself as expected. He explained the reason for such a visit as concern for Rosemary's well-being. The heiress of the family estate smiled silently, trying to remember when the prince had ever done something like this. Without remembering, Melissa realized that Rosemary had invited him, and now she would have to show him proper hospitality. The girl thanked the prince for taking care of her sister and, citing the good weather, suggested organizing a tea party in the garden. Having given orders to the servants, she wished the guests to enjoy a walk around the estate while the table was being prepared. Kevin said with a smile that the rumors about Melissa were true and that she was doing an excellent job as the head of the house. As the prince appeased Rosemary and the guards passed by the girl, she noticed a man she had not seen before. The boy seemed surprised when Melissa asked the prince about him, to which he replied that he took him at his own request. Mark, which was the guy's name, seemed embarrassed by such a modest introduction, but he didn't object. The girl, paying attention to him, said hello, while Kevin patted him on the shoulder, explaining that he was a modest guy. When the procession headed by the prince left, Melissa, unable to contain herself, told Franz that the prince completely lacked royal dignity. The girl turned around, telling the head butler that she would help with the preparations. However, she couldn't get the guy who arrived with the prince out of her head, whom she thought she had seen. After a moment of thought, Melissa finally remembered seeing him in the throne room during her father's trial. Moreover, as she replayed their meeting in detail in her head, she was sure that he looked at her with admiration. A little later, the prince and Rosemary sat down at a table in the summer gazebo, which the servants were able to quickly set. Melissa watched them from the window, noting that with the property sold and the financial problems, it was hard to find entertainment for the guests. She didn't like the fact that the prince had shown up at their estate, and she angrily complained about the constant disturbance. Exhaling, the girl turned away from the window and was about to continue on her way. She was stopped by Mark, who had arrived with the prince and was walking purposefully and confidently towards her. While she was wondering what he was doing there, he came up close and addressed her according to her title, after which she heard his thoughts. Apparently, he was thinking through a dialogue with her in his head. Mark admitted that he came to meet her in person, which surprised the girl. He continued by recalling the disease that the drug had caused and expressing gratitude for its actions in preventing potential damage to his country. He put one hand behind his back and the other on his chest to reinforce his words with a gesture. Melissa looked at the guy standing in front of her and wondered why he said that. She noticed a patch with symbols that were new to her and realized that he was not the prince's servant. Noticing her surprised look, the guy came to his senses and introduced himself as expected. He was the prince of the kingdom of Staffild. The girl realized that he was from a completely different country and apologized for any rudeness that might have slipped from her lips due to ignorance. His politeness, modesty, and manner of communication aroused her admiration, especially in comparison with Prince Kevin, who should learn a lot from Mark. However, Melissa caught herself thinking that by telling about James's sins, she had saved his country by accident, which she confessed to the prince. Mark replied that it didn't matter to him what her intentions were. He still had to thank her personally, which he did. Then he turned around and was about to leave, refusing the girl's offer to walk him home. After moving away a couple of meters, he suddenly turned around and asked if there were any sick people in the mansion. Melissa didn't understand what he was talking about and asked him to explain the reasons for such a question. And the prince explained that he had smelled the familiar medicine while he was looking for the mistress of the estate. She understood everything and told about the medicines for her mother, who was sick. After a couple of clarifying questions, Mark thought about it, and the girl heard his thoughts, in which he desperately tried to understand something and find evidence. He then considered asking Melissa a direct question, but decided against it and apologized for wasting her time. The girl tried to help him change his mind, but realized that it was too late. The prince, by the way, told her that medicine and green science, which involves treatment with plants, are very well developed in his country. Melissa also learned that he would stay as a guest for some time, and if she needed help, she could safely contact him. They were not allowed to finish their conversation when someone's shout, addressed to the girl, flew through the halls. After wishing Melissa's mother a speedy recovery, Mark turned around and walked away resolutely. The voice calling her belonged to the assistant butler, Nick, who was already approaching her. Melissa, wanting to stop the screaming that was echoing throughout the house, made herself known by answering. Nick seemed to be pleased with something and ran up to the girl, happily informing her that her mother was waiting for her daughter in her room. In addition, the heiress learned that the sweets that were served to the guests were also prepared for her. Her mood improved, but Melissa couldn't get Mark's thoughts out of her head about missing evidence of something. The princes had already left several hours earlier when the Duran estate was plunged into darkness. While doing Rosemary's evening toilet, the maid was courting the girl in her room. She shared her joy with her, pleased with Prince Kevin's courtship of the girl. As if by accident, Rosemary took a bottle with an unknown powder inside, telling the maid that she had bought too much for herself. The woman was delighted, mistaking the contents for a healing herbal mixture called Neopharm. Rosemary ordered the maid to add it to Melissa's mother's tea every time, so that she could get better as quickly as possible. The faithful worker, wanting to help, often added the powder to the tea that Rosemary gave her. The woman, unable to bear the cuteness of the girl who wanted to help, shed tears over the prisoners, admitting that she was a kind soul. Rosemary smiled at the maid's praise, saying that there was nothing wrong with that. While the woman said that she would fulfill her request, the girl thought that the death of Melissa's mother would be a worthy gratitude for her efforts. She looked in the mirror and anticipated, when she would become the wife of Prince Kevin, intending to get rid of everyone she considered dirt before that moment. The next day, Melissa, Audrey, and the food truck were walking down the hallway toward her mother's room. The girl entered the room, surprised that her mother was still sleeping, because usually by this time, she had already started the day a long time ago. Audrey headed towards the curtains, while Melissa, talking to her mother, became increasingly anxious about the silence. Audrey opened the curtains, letting sunlight into the room, but the silence that followed made her look around. Melissa was speechless when she saw her mother, and her face twisted in fear, causing Audrey to jump to the bed. Her mother's face reflected great suffering, and her chest rose and fell slightly, hinting at her imminent death. An hour later, a doctor was in the room, examining the girl's sick mother, while she impatiently asked what the diagnosis was. He was surprised because for the last couple of weeks, she had been leaving the room on her own and was getting better. And now, having conducted an examination, he found no signs of illness or signs of poison, and frankly, did not understand what was happening. Sadness appeared on the girl's face. She was having a hard time keeping herself from hopeless thoughts. The doctor suggested that severe psychological trauma could have affected her physical health, giving Melissa hope for recovery, since this had happened to her mother. Having ordered bed rest and taking the same medications, the doctor said goodbye to the family. Melissa and Audrey began to discuss the latest events, because Mom was happy after moving out of the outbuilding. The girl recalled how her mother walked freely on sunny days and could not understand what went wrong. Looking at the bed, she shared her thoughts with Audrey, hoping that the two of them could come to some kind of conclusion. The maid added that when other residents of the house saw her during walks, they said that she looked completely healthy, and in addition, there had been no stress-related situations recently. Melissa thought of Rosemary, but only Audrey had access to the medicine cabinet. The box was locked with a key, and no one could put anything in there, and the trust in the maid was unambiguous. Melissa's mother woke up and called her daughter and apologized for making everyone worry about her again. She tried to cheer the girl up, attributing her condition to ordinary fatigue. After a while, the woman passed out again, leaving Melissa to think that the medications weren't helping. The girl remembered her past life. She was 10 years old when her mother died, and then Rosemary said that it was all her. There were still 3 years to go before that moment, but she had arranged in advance for the maids to inform her of everything her sister did. And all this time, there was not a single report of Rosemary's strange behavior. Melissa decided not to wait any longer and went to look for her sister in the garden next to the estate. She found her picking flowers, along with the maid who was helping her with this. Noticing her sister, Rosemary rushed to meet her, taking with her a basket of plucked flowers. Before she could say a word, the girl grabbed Melissa's hands, expressing her joy at the meeting. Immediately, Rosemary's face became sad, and she voiced the rumors that her mother had become ill. Showing concern, she handed Melissa a basket of flowers, which greatly surprised her. Along the way, she said that she had prepared flowers especially for her sick mother. Melissa took the basket in her hands, noting that now she would not fall for sweet talk, and sooner or later, she would find out how her sister was poisoning her mother. At that very moment, the ring took effect, and the girl was immersed in a blue-black aura, which was contained in a bouquet of flowers placed in a basket. Rosemary's black thoughts flowed out of the flowers, accompanying her while she was collecting plants that hated everyone around her, and also contained surprise: why the poison had not yet finished off this whore. A basket of flowers filled with the sister's black negative flew to the ground. From such a mental blow, Melissa barely managed to stay on her feet, not paying attention to her sister's fallen gift. Rosemary seemed genuinely concerned when she asked if she was okay. There was no answer, and she went behind her sister, stroking her back and supporting her. But Melissa understood everything and, turning around, saw the mask of virtue that sat perfectly on the devilish eyes. The ring helped her again, illuminating Rosemary's thoughts and letting the girl understand who was really poisoning her mother. Her sister said goodbye to her, telling Melissa to get more rest. The girl managed to pretend not to notice and said goodbye in response, as if nothing had happened, after which Audrey approached her. Melissa noticed the ring, which turned black when it came into contact with Rosemary's darkness. The girl became sad, because having lost her main argument against evil, she would not be able to predict the development of events. Audrey silently accompanied Melissa to the estate, while she thought about how a regular doctor wouldn't help them. Then words about the well-developed medicine in the neighboring country came to her mind. Prince Mark himself said that if she needed him, she could safely ask him for help. At that time, the girl's mother woke up with difficulty because someone entered the room. She lifted her body off the bed with difficulty, as every movement she made caused pain in her body. The maid who came in asked about her well-being, but she herself saw the woman's suffering, which was reflected on her face with sympathy. Melissa's mother did not lose heart and tried to maintain her spirits, smelling the aromatic tea that the girl brought. She couldn't see how the maid, blocking the food truck with her back and holding a kettle, prepared to add medicine to the tea. The standard dose of Neopharm that she usually added to her tea was once again sprinkled into the drink. A minute later, the sick woman sitting on the bed was raising a cup of tea to her mouth. Her daughter burst into the room a moment before the sip and managed to stop her mother. She ran up to her mother, and the maid standing behind her was very surprised by such behavior. Without saying a word, Melissa took the cup of tea and handed it to Mark, who was standing behind her and had entered the room with her. Taking the drink, he waved the scent of their cup towards his nose with his hand, carefully inhaling the scent. Melissa and her mother watched Mark's manipulations with the mug in surprise. There was no doubt that his face expressed surprise when he sniffed the drink, after which he pronounced his verdict. There was poison in the mug. A few hours before the event, he was still sitting in the royal library. The messenger found him almost immediately and, quickening his pace, moved towards him. Mark was studying a book, making notes on sheets of paper, when he was distracted. The messenger reported that he had received an urgent letter from the Duran estate, which contained a request to help his mother. The prince immediately understood everything and immediately ordered that a bag of medicines be taken from his chambers. Forgetting about the book and notes on the table, he threw on his traveling jacket and quickly moved towards the exit. His final order was to immediately go to the Duran estate. Melissa and the servants met the prince before he had time to leave the carriage. As she escorted the guest to her mother's room, she expressed gratitude for the quick response to the letter. Nick, on Melissa's instructions, handed the prince a folder containing his mother's medical history and medications. He specified that it contained all the medications that had ever been given to the girl's mother. After studying the list, the prince thought that during his last visit, he had smelled a drug that was not on the list. Continuing to walk, he turned around and handed the folder to Nick, thanking him for the comprehensive information. Mark could not be mistaken in his perception and said directly that there was a high probability of poisoning. Most likely, she had been taking the poisonous plant for a long time. In Melissa's mind, trying to understand how her mother took poison, the image of Rosemary immediately popped into her head. However, at the moment, she considered it unimportant, putting priority on getting immediate help. The door to the mother's room was open, and sounds of someone else's presence could be heard from there, which frightened the girl. She forbade everyone except Audrey to enter this room, and hearing a strange voice, she rushed to the door. Melissa saw what she had been so afraid of. The maid was trying to give her mother something to drink. Taking the drink from her mother's hands, she handed it to Mark and waited for his assessment. The girl's eyes darkened when he mentioned the poison added to the tea. This was news even to the maid who brought this very tea. The prince calmly continued that it was necessary to begin treatment immediately. Melissa felt better because she believed in Mark's abilities, which she shared with her sick mother. While the boy was preparing to begin treatment, Franz apologized to the girl's mother, wanting to say something. His address was interrupted by Audrey's scream. She was shouting at the maid, asking why she added poison and why she violated the visiting ban. Nick stared thoughtfully at the food truck, where the kettle of poison stood, trying to understand why and who needed it. The woman's voice trembled, and she objected, saying that she had not added any poison. Melissa, meanwhile, was hard to convince of this, and her angry gaze pierced the girl. Seeing that they did not believe her, the maid fell to her knees and told about the neophragm added to the tea, which was considered beneficial. Melissa let that moment slide for now, wanting to know why she had broken the ban and entered the room. The maid had nothing to answer to this question, and out of fear, she tried to think of something. Nick and Audrey looked at each other, not knowing whether to believe the culprit or not. Breaking the silence, Melissa asked if there was any malice, and the girl burst out. She said that she only wanted the lady to recover from her illness quickly. The prince intervened in the conversation, asking what exactly she was adding Neopharm for. Without waiting for an answer, the prince announced that the treatment was finished and that he would now explain the rest, while Franz carefully covered her mother behind them. Mark took the mug of tea and presented it to Melissa, wanting to show something. He continued to explain that this powder, masquerading as neopharm, was a very expensive poison, tasteless, colorless, and odorless, which only aristocrats could obtain. Then the maid, still shaking with fear, said that the powder had been given to her. Melissa was impenetrable when asked who had obtained and given her such an expensive poison. Without waiting for an answer, the girl ordered Nick to take her away from here. The assistant head butler led the crying maid out of the room. After some time, Melissa accompanied the prince next to the carriage. Mark wished his mother a speedy recovery and reminded her of the need to take her medications on time, to which the girl thanked the guy. She stood with Audrey and Franz for some time, watching the carriage with the prince drive away. As if waking up, she turned around. Her angry gaze was directed at the estate where the servant who had been poisoning her mother was located. They headed towards the entrance, and the girl now knew for sure that Rosemary had a hand in this. Unfortunately for her, the ring was still black, and she couldn't use it, but she didn't need it. Melissa, accompanied by servants, walked resolutely towards the maid, intending to find out or interrogate the truth from her. Nick ran out to meet them, almost shouting, to urgently tell them the unpleasant news. He himself was surprised when he reported the news that the culprit of the incident had disappeared. Melissa's eyes widened in surprise, because she trusted Nick, and disappearing from the estate without a trace was on the verge of fantasy. The next day, sitting in her office, she listened to the report of the assistant butler. He informed her that even the king's soldiers were looking for the maid in all the nearby places, including the city. Melissa thought that she couldn't have gone far, but she couldn't get the thoughts of despair out of her head. It would have been better to guard her, because with her help, she could have proven Rosemary's guilt and gotten rid of the last problem in the estate. 2 weeks later, Duran's heiress read the official notice that the search was over. She did what she could and did not achieve any results, which made her very sad. The maid seemed to have fallen into the ground because the services were unable to find any traces or a body. Melissa knew that wherever she was, she had taken with her evidence of Rosemary's guilt, and the investigation was over. The girl recalled Rosemary's game when she was charged. Sometimes Melissa was amazed at how sincerely she could cry and inspire innocence in those around her, which is what happened during the conversation. She even jumped up then, screaming that she could not wish evil on her mother and would never do such a thing. Real tears streamed down my sister's cheeks as she insisted that she knew nothing about the poison in the tea. Rosemary rushed to Audrey, daring Melissa to ask her or any other maid about it. Melissa couldn't prove anything and could only watch this one-woman circus, and she couldn't help but notice the chuckle coming from Audrey's belly, where Rosemary had pressed herself, as if seeking comfort. Melissa's gaze fell on the ring, the black crystal of which no longer allowed her to read someone's thoughts. She replayed in her mind the conversation with the maid, whose thoughts she could not verify. Now she would have to wean herself off the idea of mind-reading, as the ring no longer showed signs of magic. Everyone needs evidence except Melissa, because she knew Rosemary got the poison. For everyone, she is just a 7-year-old girl. However, even this is too cool for her, and the girl began to suspect that someone else is behind her sister. Audrey entered the room and, smiling, placed tea on Melissa's table, asking her to relax. Although the recent event was terrible, Meme is now much better and is steadily recovering. Finally, she asked Melissa to drop in on her mother today. The girl's thoughts were occupied by the warm image of her mother, and although the result was not the best, this time she managed to protect her mother. Melissa was not happy with the way things were turning out, but she admitted that she had become much stronger. In another part of the estate, her sister sat, not occupying her thoughts with anything like that. She opened the envelope with a letter opener and pulled out a personal message. The report stated that they had a maid and would soon be looking after her mother, which Rosemary read and lit a candle in a glass frame. The paper burned down while Rosemary thought about what Beltran had said in the letter and was sad only that she had not managed to get rid of at least one obstacle. She was not very sad, waiting for the hour when she would marry Kevin and become a princess. It won't be quick, but she's willing to wait. And for now, Logan is enough as a link, who has served her family faithfully at the Duran estate. At the same time, in the luxurious chambers, a pair of aristocrats were sitting at the table, one of whom had arrived from the country of Stayfield. One asked the other about the maid and learned that she had been given a room. She was well looked after and kept quiet, not knowing that she would soon be looking after Serena Duran, who would soon arrive. The men laughed as they discussed some plan that involved the two countries. One of them did not forget to obligingly pour the other one some expensive wine. The owner laughed and noted that, thanks to the maid, they wouldn't have to put up with Serena's temper, taking a dart from the nearby board. A hand with many expensive rings with rubies and emeralds, obeying its owner, aimed the projectile somewhere at the wall. The dart hit a map that depicted both states with attached photographs of rulers and influential people. The guest ordered not to worry about trifles, but to act carefully, after which he let the second one go. The next dart landed squarely in Prince Mark's chest, causing the thrower to grin cruelly. The next day, Melissa's mother was walking in the garden with Audrey, in the garden area next to the estate. Nick and Franz watched them, sharing their mutual joy at the woman's recovery. Nick asked him if he had always been so worried about this woman and her daughter. Sometimes the boy would look in on the head butler at night and see him at work, which consisted of looking for medicine for a sick woman. Franz thought about it, because he had a burden on his soul that perhaps he should share. Having made up his mind, he turned to Nick, offering to chat with him for a bit, to which he readily agreed. And Franz began his story from the moment when Melissa was not yet the head of the Duran family. One day, James decided to kick out the head butler and the maid, who were his parents. Franz was appointed head butler while he was still an apprentice, because the head of the house needed a puppet that was easy to control. In the end, he became one, unable to object to the Duke due to his youth. Franz was forced to watch for years as James abused his concubine and her daughter. He ended his story by believing that if he were strong enough, he could make life easier for Melissa and her mother. Nick praised the head butler for his valiant impulse, not knowing that the Duchess had also heard the whole story. She smiled warmly as she watched Franz lament about his past life on the estate. Melissa intervened in the conversation by approaching the servants, who, upon seeing her, stood up straight. Wanting to cheer Franz up, she said that she knew who had been ordering food to be brought to the outbuilding all this time. Knowing the answer in advance, she asked the head butler if James had given her orders to feed them. Melissa noted that Franz was taking a big risk by helping them, because if the former Duke noticed this, he would be in trouble. Here, for the first time in his life, the senior butler heard words of gratitude for his service. Melissa added playfully that if he still felt guilty, then he could serve her faithfully. Nick loved scenes of justice in life, and one of them unfolded before his eyes. Franz readily bowed to Melissa and said that he was ready to dedicate his life to her. The girl was glad about this reaction, and the fact that she was surrounded by loyal, noble people. Prince Mark soon arrived, and Melissa ordered the horses to be watered, after which she escorted the boy to his mother. After the inspection, they discussed the prince's future plans. The girl asked if he was planning to return to his homeland soon, while treating the guest to tea and cookies. Mark said that he would leave in 3 days, and reassured the owner about his mother's health. This time, he brought with him more suitable means for treatment in sufficient quantities for recovery. For such free help, Melissa thanked Mark again from the bottom of her heart. However, to the girl's surprise, he said that he should thank her himself. In his country, he was ridiculed despite his extensive theoretical knowledge due to the lack of minimal practice, so much so that he stopped believing in his own strength. Having the opportunity to cure Melissa's mother, which he did, has given Mark renewed confidence in his abilities, and he can now look forward with confidence. The prince and the heiress exchanged pleasantries and were grateful to have met each other. The girl thought that despite being 10 years old, he had the communication skills of an adult. Over the time that had passed, the ring had regained its ability, and Melissa heard the guy's thoughts. He was admiring the cookies and tea and was thinking about asking to wrap both up for him to take home. Then she heard the idea of asking for the recipe for making the kind of cookies that he devoured with gusto. Relaxing, the girl smiled kindly, because his thoughts corresponded to his age, and in them he was real, kind, and reliable. Mark asked if anything could have gone wrong, with a hint about his behavior, and Melissa reassured him, apologizing for laughing. Calling Audrey, the girl whispered in her ear to wrap up some tea and cookies for the prince for the journey, and at the same time, the recipe for both. The head maid went to fulfill the girl's request, while Mark wondered about the order given in secret from him. After a silence, the guy with a serious face turned to Melissa with a request. She thought he was worried when he asked her if she was okay with continuing their relationship. He told her his thoughts. When she was recognized as a full-fledged Duchess of the Kingdom of Valeria, he, as Prince Stayfield, would have a strong ally. Melissa smiled, realizing the prospects and power of the proposed union and her advantage if he could become a worthy prince. Mark ran out of patience as he waited for her answer, which forced him to ask her directly about her decision. The girl happily agreed, and the prince extended his hand to her, wanting to seal the verbal agreement. Melissa extended her hand in response, expressing her willingness to continue and develop fruitful cooperation. Hands joined, marking the birth of a new union based on friendship and mutual assistance. And so the birthday of the new mistress of the estate arrived, who in the morning, with the help of Audrey, dressed up in a new dress. Wearing a silk satin dress, complemented by graphite-colored patterns framing the seams, Melissa looked like a true duchess. The head maid was as happy as if for herself when she saw how the outfit suited the girl and led her to the mirror. Seeing herself, Melissa became modest, doubting whether it should be so luxurious, to which Audrey decisively invited the girl to the guests. It was the girl's 12th birthday, and as she walked down the hallway with Audrey, she thought that in 5 years of living here, this was the first real celebration. In previous years, although guests came to the court, no one paid attention to her, because they came mainly to see James. The girl left the estate, where she was met by her mother, who was looked after by Nick just in case, while Franz watched the progress of the celebration. The daughter threw herself into the arms of her mother, who was beside herself at the sight of her daughter after many years of slavery. In the end, Audrey stayed with her, and Franz and Nick walked proudly behind the birthday girl as she walked towards the guests. The crowd of guests greeted her with toasts to her health, because now everyone had come to the celebration specifically for her. A couple of businessmen expressed admiration for her success, and one of them suggested talking about business. Melissa answered everyone politely, not ignoring this proposal, which she suggested discussing first with the butlers. She was drawn to a familiar voice, the voice that had helped her words gain power in the royal hall. Queen Sophia herself arrived at the celebration, and upon noticing her, the guests stepped aside. She congratulated Melissa on her birthday, noting that she had grown a lot since the last time they met. The birthday girl bowed, expressing gratitude, but she didn't even think that Sophia would come, because her letter was a necessary formality. The queen came closer, beginning the conversation with the events of 5 years ago, since the time when the girl gave her a candy with an opal, and at the trial asked her to lead the Duran family. Her success over the past 5 years has not gone unnoticed by the royal family, which she informed Melissa about. The girl, in turn, did not forget about her assistants, saying that this success was achieved through joint efforts. The queen fanned herself to refresh her face and noted the girl's modesty. Melissa's ring worked fine, and she heard Sophia thinking that the birthday girl would come. But instead of voicing her thoughts, she asked the girl if she would take part in the exit. This ball, called the exit, was personally organized by the queen for the daughters of aristocrats. This was the beginning of their acquaintance with high society, and also spoke of their growing up. Melissa confirmed her intention to come, and Sophia reminded Rosemary to come too. Then the queen leaned closer to the girl and asked if it was time to think about marriage since she had decided to visit the exit. She then suggested that she had a close relationship with Prince Mark of the Kingdom of Stayfield. Understanding the meaning of the assumption, the girl refuted the queen's thoughts about her closeness with the prince, saying that they were only good friends. Sophia did clarify whether Melissa was planning to marry him. Having heard the desired answer, she then suggested to the girl that they discuss something face-to-face. Their conversation was interrupted by Rosemary's cry, calling her sister, coming from the garden. She held Prince Kevin's arm and boasted about it, saying that she had brought him here. Noticing the queen, she released the prince's hand and performed a welcoming curtsy. Then Kevin turned his gaze to Melissa and was struck by her beauty. The girl had really become much prettier since their last meeting, which was very well emphasized by the dress. To Rosemary's great surprise, Kevin unceremoniously abandoned her and headed straight for the birthday girl. He took Melissa's hand, expressing admiration for her beauty, which embarrassed her. What followed was something no one expected. He gallantly kissed the birthday girl's hand. Melissa was in shock, as her face showed a question about the reality of what was happening. It was scary to look at Rosemary at all. It was as if she had been struck by electricity, and, losing control of her own face, she opened her mouth in amazement. Kevin kept jabbering questions that everyone except him knew about how old she was, whether it was her birthday, and banal congratulations. The girl literally pulled her hand away and, expressing gratitude, bowed to the prince. Trying to remain calm and cool, she stated that he shouldn't have wasted his time and energy on her. Her thoughts were pierced by the ice of hatred, because for all 5 years she had avoided him, because she knew what kind of man he was, while he stood opposite her and smirked at her modesty. As if remembering something, he turned around and clicked to call the butler standing nearby. Kevin said he had prepared a gift for her, as the servant opened the wooden box. Everyone froze in shock at the prince's stupidity, because he was going to do something he didn't even understand, standing smugly surrounded by guests. In the wooden case lay the royal tiara, the significance of which he either did not know or did not remember. Rosemary never regained control of her face, and she stood there with her mouth open, and a trickle of sweat ran down the queen's face from excitement. There was silence in the yard, since the guests also saw everything perfectly well, and the thick-headed prince grinned at his own irresistibility and stupidity. Once again, he put the girl in an awkward position, forcing her to think carefully about her future behavior. She knew that if a man from the royal family gives a girl even a piece of jewelry, it already means a proposal to date, not to mention a tiara. The tiara, lying in a case in front of her, was practically equated to a proposal of marriage. It was impossible to describe how tired she was of the arrogance and idiocy of the man of royal blood standing before her, who had gotten to her even in another time. Melissa glanced at Sophia, and from her reaction, she realized that she knew nothing about it. The girl didn't give a damn about this idiot, but she couldn't lose the queen's trust, and she had to somehow get out of this situation. Melissa understood how to act, and smiling said that she was not His Majesty's equal. She continued that the wise prince had specially prepared such a luxurious decoration for her to test her, and from these words, Kevin was surprised, not understanding what he was doing or what was happening. The birthday girl said that Kevin saw her ability to win over the queen, and so he decided to test her in this way. The butler and the guests began to think as the girl wanted, and the queen understood perfectly well what she was doing. She came up close to the prince and, smiling, trying to make him understand what a fool he was. The girl said that since he was dating Rosemary, this tiara could not possibly have been intended for her. Without looking at the decoration any longer, she slammed the wooden case shut with such anger that the butler almost dropped her. Regaining her self-control, Melissa smiled carefreely and said that she was glad for the test. The fool was about to object, but his mother intervened in time, loudly addressing him. Trying to restrain herself, she feigned surprise at her son's wisdom. Sophia didn't let him get a word in edgewise, as he was actively trying to do so and ruin everything, and said that she admired her son. Suppressing her son's stupidity, she looked at Melissa and apologized with an intonation and turn of phrase that made it clear why. The birthday girl was pleased with herself and, having accepted the apology, thanked the queen. At this point, Rosemary seemed to come to her senses, taking the royal mannequin by the arm and leading him away, suggesting they go for a walk. The day was drawing to a close as the last guests left the event, after which the maids and butlers began clearing the laid tables. Melissa sat in front of the mirror in her room and complained to Audrey about being tired. The door to the room opened with a bang, and Rosemary appeared on the threshold. She was beside herself with rage and began the conversation with a direct question, namely, when her sister managed to charm the prince. Audrey was forced to bow, and Melissa did not deign to look at her sister, starting the conversation with a demand not to enter her room without knocking. She then said that she was always busy with family matters and never spoke to Kevin, while Rosemary accused her of secret meetings, wondering why he decided to give her the tiara. Melissa got angry and turned around, giving her sister a hard look, slowly saying that she didn't have time for something like that. The sisters met eyes, and it seemed that the environment between them would now begin to melt. Melissa understood the reason for the panic, because it happened suddenly, but she would never, under any circumstances, get engaged to a man who executed her without thinking. However, She decided to gain some benefit by saying that it would be good for the family if she got engaged to Kevin. Her words caused the desired reaction of fury from Rosemary, who opened her mouth again. She was about to say something, but Melissa interrupted the conversation, asking her to leave. Rosemary, who had fallen silent in impotent rage, turned and immediately left her sister's room. Walking down the corridor, accompanied by her maid, she was sure that she was the one who would become queen. Rosemary gritted her teeth, unable to believe that her sister had the ability to replace her with such a pedigree. The girl stood next to her room, slowly entering and turning to Luba, who was ready to fulfill any of her requests. She gave orders to contact those people who stood behind her and helped her, which the maid immediately understood. Rosemary smirked, warning herself that if Melissa continued to interfere with her, she would simply die. The moon was already shining outside the window when Audrey, entering Melissa's room again, saw her sitting in a chair. She didn't feel like sleeping, so she asked the maid to make her some tea, after which her gaze fell on a gift box standing nearby, with flowers attached to the top. She took it in her hands and placed it on her knees, guessing from whom this gift was delivered. Her guess was confirmed by a neatly handwritten postcard containing a laconic congratulation and 4 square jars. She remembered the unspoken alliance they had formed and was glad to have such a friend. Even though 5 years had passed, he was still just as polite and responsible, she thought, taking out a jar of herbal tea. It, like the other 4, was sealed with the Duke's seal, indicating that the tea had been personally selected by Mark. Near the wall of the box, after she took out the jar, her attention was drawn to an envelope. Opening the letter, she read an invitation to the Duke's court in the Kingdom of Stayfield. She was interested in what that modest boy looked like now, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't imagine him. Here she realized that the guy was now 15 years old and dreamily thought about the trip, wanting to see him sooner. Anticipating the meeting, Melissa's fatigue had completely disappeared, so all she could do was sit in her chair, imagine the meeting, and plan the trip. A couple of days later, Audrey brought another gift from Kevin into Melissa's room. He sent them every day since the banquet, which made the girl very angry, so she once again ordered that everything be thrown out. Afterwards, she went about her business, signing a contract with a representative of the Merchant Guild, who was accompanied by Franz. The guest was grateful, which he told Melissa directly, because the agreement would facilitate the transportation of goods. As he was about to leave, he voiced rumors. The city believed that Prince Kevin was courting Melissa, which he decided to ask about personally. The girl tried to correct the situation, indignantly wondering to herself why she ran into Kevin so often. But the representative of the trade guild did not take her objections seriously. After her birthday, when the prince almost proposed to her, denying the relationship was pointless. Melissa, putting a smile on her face, patiently listened to his wishes for the future young couple, thinking that these rumors would greatly hinder her. Nick came to the rescue, interrupting the guest, and announcing that the carriage was ready and waiting. Having said goodbye to the guest, she relaxed, deciding that this would be the last thing she would do today. Plopping down on the couch, she tiredly shared with Nick and Franz that everyone was only talking about this Kevin. Nick confirmed her words, saying that he heard the same thing today at the bar, and this topic of discussion was number 1. The girl took a sip of the tea that Audrey had brought, fresh and personally picked by Mark. Looking at her watch, she informed the servants that after tea, she would go for a walk before the trip. Melissa thought with a smile that today was an important day, meeting Prince Mark. And so, sometime later, she arrived at the royal villa of Stuffield. A guard of knights stood before the entrance, and the butler loudly announced her arrival. As she entered, she performed a welcoming curtsy and greeted Mark. He came up and asked to raise his head, since he himself could establish certain proprieties. Mark was dressed in formal attire, which looked like a cast on him, and then expressed his joy at the meeting. The prince extended his hand to her, and she gave it, thinking of shaking hands. But in addition to this, Mark gallantly kissed her. He then invited her to sit down and discuss a couple of important issues. She admired Mark during tea drinking, because he had matured a lot in 5 years. The prince knew that during these 5 years, she managed to save the dying family and was glad about it. Melissa responded in kind, saying that she also often heard about the successful and noble prince of the country of Stayfield. She also heard that he was able to organize an entire research center, Its employees are developing a cure for various types of diseases, including opal. Mark noted that aristocrats are the same everywhere when the girl voiced their desire to get closer to him. Even in his own country, hundreds of aristocrats offer him various projects regarding medicines. He sighed, because these were vile people with the same motives, and none of them could be trusted. The girl suggested that it was incredibly difficult for him, because when it came to money, few people could be honest. Mark agreed with her, saying that as a prince, he had power and opportunities. But he couldn't afford to deal with people he couldn't trust, and Melissa asked him what he would do with the new drug. Here, the butler presented the contract, and Mark said that they had come to the main topic of the conversation. Melissa was a girl with a promising future and someone who could be trusted. And so, he gave her a pre-prepared contract, saying that it was time to start working together. The girl was happy with this attitude and decided to read the contract a little later, since the prince then invited her to go to the summer gazebo for some fresh air. Once there, he waited patiently and drank tea with sweets while the girl read the document. Their attention was drawn to the crunching sound in the bushes near the table and the butler's shouts that someone was not allowed there. A few seconds later, Prince Kevin emerged from the hedge, ignoring the unacceptability of such a method of appearance for the prince of the country. He said hello and said he finally found her. While Melissa hoped it was a dream, Mark decided to intervene and raised his hand, gesturing for the girl to stay put. Kevin, with an idiotic smile, said that he wanted to meet her, but he didn't have time to finish. Prince Mark stood before him, silently looking at the future problem of the neighboring country and thinking about how to tell him more gently what he thought of him.